Hello and welcome to Lore Dive, the podcast about lore, world building, and alternative takes. This is the final episode of Series 1, The Peoples of Chult and the Peninsula. This is lucky number 13, and I'm your guide, Graham, so let's dive into some lore tonight. So, just going to start out with an apology there. I was having some technical difficulties, so I'm starting a few minutes late. My apologies for that. I did not intend for that to occur. However, I recently changed some settings on Twitch and did not realize that it was going to cascade into some other things. And so it took a few minutes for my brain to figure out what was going on. So, on to today's subject. Today's a twofer episode and the capstone of the first series. I mean, realistically, I could keep going down a crazy rabbit hole with this, with every possible beast folk, monster folk, demi-human, all that sort of stuff, and just like keep on going and keep on going, through guesswork and supposition and all that sort of thing. But I'm going to stop series 1 here because it's time to move on. There's new things happening. There's more information I want to share, and it's time to get away from this area. So tonight, I am covering off on Wild Elves and the Azer. Now, I'm going to start with Wild Elves, and of course with the history and additions. So, Wild Elves are a pretty unique entry here because they're a core player race in D&D. So I'm not going to go as in-depth as I would normally do to their history through the additions. Suffice to say, as far as I can tell, they first appeared in first edition, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and specifically in the Greyhawk setting, and soon became a staple of the D&D world plug-and-play triumvirate of elves, that being high, grey, and wild. They're just sort of everywhere. They were confirmed to be in Chult in second edition, in the Jungles of Chult book. And at the same time, they also confirmed that there was half-elves of mixed wild elf and Chultan descent in the same book. I mean, no other details were given, but that was that. And of course, they have a massive, massive history in the Forgotten Realms in general. And now, if you guys notice, my voice sounds a little bit funny. I am just getting over a rather horrifying cold, so sorry if you have to listen to any extraneous sounds that I'm generating. I am sorry about that. Now, their history in the campaign setting. So Wild Elf lore, like all elf lore in the Forgotten Realms, has become muddled recently with the release of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. This book had a lot of retcons going on in it that really made things quite squidgy, and in their effort to universalize the lore of elves, it sort of threw a wrench into the lore of the worlds that already existed. However, with all that said, their original lore was more straightforward, which is something that I never thought I'd find myself saying about elf lore in D&D. Elves, like pretty much every demi-human race on Toril, are not native to it, and they are exactly the same as them. So their history kicks off in the wonderful year of minus 27,000 Dale Reckoning, when the Fae were involved in a conflict with the dragons who ruled Toril at the time. Now, the thing to remember here is that this is during the phase, the Dawn Age, I believe it was called, and this is a phase between the Days of Thunder and the Arcane Age. And the major powers at this time were actually dragons and giants, which were pretty amazing, and the two were in conflict more or less constantly. However, apparently the Fae were also in conflict with dragons, and this is something I did not know until I started researching for doing this. And at some point, the Fae decided that the best way to fight with dragons was to open up lots of portals and encourage green elves to migrate to Toril. Now, these green elves are the ultimate ancestors of Toril's dark elves and wild elves. And when they arrived at the time, they did not worship the Seldarine. Instead, they followed Fae gods, which is pretty cool by any standard. Now, the other thing to remember here, and that is something that I kind of find interesting, is that this plan of the Fae is to have the elves fight dragons backfired spectacularly. Not only did the elves not really fight dragons very often, like they'd fight them once in a while, but one group, the Illithiri, who would ultimately become one of the major groups of dark elves on the planet, actually instead brokered a deal with the dragons to live in peace. And so the Fae's whole plan of like bringing elves to do their bidding and fight their war against dragons didn't work at all. I just found that kind of funny. And fast forwarding now tens of thousands of years to around 1475 Dale Reckoning. So this is in 4th edition times. Wild elves form dangerous and nomadic tribes in the Elf Harrow. Now, there's still wild elves everywhere, but this is where they're most notable. And this area, the Elf Harrow, is what's left of the area that was the beginning of the Chultan Peninsula. So it's roughly what's left of northeast Lapalia. Lapalia? I am terrible at pronouncing that word and that location. And parts of the Western Shar, as well as, I believe, an area called the Bandit Wastes. And they are described as being xenophobic and highly motivated, and the area is avoided by most. And these are the only real entries about them. But it is interesting that the term Green Elf remained a common descriptor for them until at least 1375 Dale Reckoning. And to me, this has a very cool and interesting implication that Eladrin, as we saw in 4th edition and 5th edition when they were turned into the High Elf analogs and then into Proto Elf analogs in those editions respectively, that they never made it to Toril in antiquity, and that they are still very much outsiders to that world. All the elves on Toril came from either these green elves who arrived, so effectively like early wild elves, who weren't always wild. They actually had cities and empires and all that sort of stuff too. Or they came as refugees later after a gold and silver, or correction, a gold and moon elf area was destroyed. And so, they migrated over. So it's kind of an interesting aside there. And what is their current state in the campaign setting? Oh, yeah. Wild elves, they're part of the core player race set. So their current standing is that they are a standard player race available for anybody to play. However, if you go into the lore, they had some pretty serious business going on in 4th edition. Prior to that, they were sort of like they're out there, but they're not really doing a whole bunch sort of operation. But this changed in 4th edition, and with the Elf Harrow, they really moved into an active status where they were claiming territory, they were keeping people out of it, and they weren't being nearly as passive as they were in previous editions. Like in previous editions, they've said like, if you go into wild elf territory, you might die. Now it was a guarantee that you would die if you went into their area. Unfortunately, 4th edition sort of left them hanging because it didn't really delve deeply into their motivations to be so active outside of wanting to survive, which is great as a short-term modifier, but I mean, time means almost nothing to elves for all intents and purposes from like the human perspective. And the idea that they would just like live a hardscrabble life in an area where they could possibly not live a hardscrabble life for 100 years just doesn't track for me at all. It gets kind of old after a while. However, at the moment, it can be safely assumed that the Elf Harrow elves are probably still very much a thing, and that any wild elves in, on, or around the peninsula are probably less stealthy and more murder you in the night sort of operations right now. So, my take on how it could be done. Now, the thing to bear in mind with this as we go into it is that I'm not talking about wild elves as the broad spectrum of wild elves, covering the entire planet, and every group should be like this. I'm talking very specifically about the wild elves that were in the Elf Harrow that may have survived on the Mare Archipelago, and in Chult that are now back on this peninsula that's connecting everything up again. Okay, because I think these dark-skinned, dark-haired elves deserve a shot. They Like, there's so many stories about redemption and rebuilding and trying again and doing all sorts of stuff that happen in these games, and they just seem to skip elves constantly because of this weird Tolkien inspired, oh, we're dying off, or oh, we need to avoid being seen, or what, I don't even know. That's just no. Let's have them do something. Let's give them a shot at the title. So, things that I would do. I would have Wild Elf pockets, not in the sense of trousers, but in the sense of they survived all over the archipelago. There's lots of islands going on. Wild Elves are great at surviving. And now they're reconnected. They've had 100 years apart, and things have changed. Maybe some groups are less wild than others are, wild. And this may lead to schisms in the larger population in the area. They may have poor relations because of this. Odd allies. Wild elves are, and not the usual suspects as their allies. Wild elves didn't like other demi-humans. They didn't like humans. They barely tolerated other elves. So what I'm thinking is, maybe their allies in the area look nothing like the normal allies that other elves around the planet have. In this case, maybe they're working with and around and have formed alliances with lizard folk, tabaxi, and the Aarakocra. They're not in competition for resources with any of these groups or living space. They have mutually beneficial. They could have mutually beneficial arrangements set up for defense or assistance or even trade for things. I mean, maybe wild elves don't want to spend all their time trekking around in the swamp, and maybe lizard folk don't want to spend all their time trying to climb trees or get things from high places that they are just not geared to get towards. I'm not sure, but I think that it would be cool if they had some alignments with, or not alignments, some alliances with other groups outside of the norm. That would be cool. Now, the next one is returning to the arcane. So magic is part of most elves' lives in the Forgotten Realms and in most Dungeons and Dragons settings. There are notes for some groups who've eschewed magic or moved away from it, and wild elves are nominally one of those groups. But you know what? That's boring to me, especially given the sort of epic history they had. Yeah, sure, maybe they've lost some skills, but stories remain. And what are cautionary tales at one point may become, inspiring tales of things that you may be able to achieve in other times. And that's what I'm looking at. So, green elves, they had cities, they had small empires, they had tons of stuff. In fact, they were doing fantastic, literally right up until Sun Elves and Moon Elves showed up, and then Sun Elves and Moon Elves just screwed everything up, especially Sun Elves. They are literally the worst. I'm probably going to do an episode on how horrible Sun Elves are in the Forgotten Realms at some point. But I think that Wild Elves should be given an opportunity to get some stuff back, do more than just survive. Because seriously, life in the Forgotten Realms, it's just not conducive to a low or no magic life, especially if you're not living in large numbers or building a lot of fortifications. And that's the thing. I mean, way back in the past, yeah, sure, green elves may have been able to live, without having to use a lot of magic, or only be able to use a little bit of magic, but they're also in cities. They had defense forces, they had infrastructure, they had all these things that let them do that. And now they're just sort of they live out in the middle of nowhere using bog iron and flint to make arrowheads to kill people with. No, let's give them something cool. And there's some really you could spin this into whole quests to reclaim artifacts, magical items, lost history, all sorts of stuff, because the realms, the history and the archaeology of the place is insanely deep. And you could go so many places with this and do so many things and end up with this flourishing and developing renewal of green elves in the southern part of the continent. I think that'd be cool. The next thing that I would have is I would have varied responses amongst the different groups to humans and half elves. The main reason being for that is that, maybe some groups, maybe in Chult proper or on some more isolated islands of the Mare Archipelago before it was united into a peninsula, intermixed more with surviving Chultan and Tashalan humans, resulting in larger populations of half elves in comparison to other areas. So let the culture adapt and let it vary. I've never been a fan of monocultures for anything, pretty much, in game. And, this adds a little bit of variety to the setting. You can even have like different villages having different opinions and ideas about things, and it all helps to differentiate the wild elves of this area from the sort of standardized ones that you see in the PHB. And now, as I said earlier, I'm recovering from cold. I'm just going to have a quick drink there to keep going. And just as a heads up, this is not going to be a long episode tonight here, because my voice is just not up to doing a full-on operation here yet. However, that's it for Wild Elves. So let's move into the Azer. So, Azer, they're pretty sweet. They are dwarves with, depending on how you read it, either literal bronze or bronze-colored skin with fire for hair, and they exude a huge amount of heat. They wear metal kilts and aprons for clothes. They don't wear shoes because you don't need shoes when you're made of metal, I guess. And their hair is on fire, or is fire. Pretty awesome all around. Kind of like Genasi, but more. And yeah, let's go into the history of them and the editions, because they are in Chult, and they are in the Underdark of Chult, and that's awesome. So, first edition, they arrive in Monster Manual 2. That's right, Monster Manual 2, and not the Fiend Folio. Like everything else has come in the Fiend Folio, this time we have Monster Manual 2. And they don't get a particularly flattering description in there. They're more or less just, the description of them doubles down on all the stereotypes about dwarves and just sort of makes them fiery instead. And in fact, they don't even fully describe their leaders. Like, they talk a little bit about how they have this powerful king whose name I can't pronounce, and I'm not even going to try to, and how there's larger Azer. So like it's like a dwarf but bigger, but not human. And how they have resistance to magic, and the rest of the powers are unknown, and that's it. It just like leaves you at that. That's all the information they give. Like I don't even know where to go with that. So that was it. And at this point, they haven't officially been related to dwarves yet. That's still sort of, pardon me. That's still sort of in the works. Maybe. I don't know. And so we'll move on to second edition. And second edition brings us the Azer in Spelljammer and Al-Qadim. Not any, and in like, of course, the Monster Manual, but they're one of the many compendiums. And the idea was solid from first edition. And then they decided to do something with it. Sort of. Spelljammer updated their stat lines to second edition standards. Left everything else the exact same. They're greedy, no compassion, will do anything for like purple or red colored gems, and their word is their bond. That's it. Done. Al-Qadim, on the other hand, took things in a new direction. They're already fire element associated, but they doubled down on it hard and added the story of enslavement by the Ifrit, an ongoing conflict with them, their part in making this parts of the city of brass and designing it, and it also positioned them as an independent power in the elemental plane of fire. And, started to hint that they may actually be related to dwarves in some way. As the Ifrit apparently are big on enslaving dwarves because I guess they want more people to make things. So there's a lot of things that start happening in this edition, but if you don't look at Al-Qadim, you wouldn't know. And even the book that they appear in, The Secrets of the Lamp, like I looked at that book and I was like, okay, there's it's a pretty hot genie on the front of it, but what is this book even about? And it wasn't so much Secrets of the Lamp as it was a really interesting examination of the entire like system of the elements. Like they dug deep into all four elements, the different types of genies that were involved in all of them, like the politics and a whole bunch of other things. It was a really good book that, to look at the cover, you would not expect at all for the material that was inside of it to be what it was about. So it was really good. They didn't give any cultural information per se in there, they gave a bit of cultural information, but they sort of like left a lot of other things up to you to decide. And that was that. Now, third edition. Welcome to Savage Species. So, third edition had a lot of supporting works, and Savage Species is one of them. And this book brought a ton of monsters into play and presented the excellent, in my opinion, system of monster as class. Now, this being an idea that sort of, it dovetails well with the prestige class ideas they had going on in third edition, but also sort of harked back to the old races class ideas from like basic. And the idea was that they had a whole bunch of monsters available, and instead of just saying, oh yeah, you have an effective class level, which was the ECL was a terrible system to deal with, because you really realize quickly like how much the challenge rating system and like the ECL system didn't accurately reflect the reality on the ground for a lot of monsters when they were, put into fights that they were supposed to be able to deal with. But what they did instead was they broke all these monsters and monster folk down into what was effectively a prestige class you would take at level 1. So you'd be a level 1 Azer, a level 1 werewolf, a level 1 fire giant, all that sort of thing. And it scaled all the hit points, powers, and everything else to that. And what I loved about it was that it made a whole bunch of monster folk instantly playable. Like the only request that it made of the people playing was that you dual classed. If you didn't just want to be the monster, you wanted to be a ranger or a sorcerer or rogue, whatever, you had to dual class. So you'd be like a werewolf ranger or an Azer cleric or something like that. And I thought that was awesome. Because it gave my players more stuff to play with, and it let me scale monsters. So you could encounter a werewolf at level 1 or 2, and it wouldn't just immediately run your show. And this was awesome, and the Azer were in on it. There's a nice little section on the Azer. Not a whole lot of cultural information, just sort of like a lot of repeated stuff from previous works. But it was in there, and it was available. It's a player race, good to go. And then 4th edition. And it's doing 4th edition things. The Azer do make an appearance in 4th edition. However, there's a selection of monsters only. They have a decent spread of abilities and powers, following with the sort of the standard. This is, what's it called there? These are your strikers, leaders, field commanders. I forget all the terms there, but they had all that stuff going on, and it was all right, but not available as player races. And then finally, we have 5th edition, where they are monsters again, and that's just it. Despite being, in my opinion, a very playable race, their history in the campaign setting, it is non-existent. The Azer history has no dates. It's linked to Al-Qadim, and arguably you could say to the other 1001 Arabian Nights-esque area of Toril, Kalimshan, and you might be able to argue a bit there. But it's not, they're not mentioned anywhere in the Grand History of the Realms that I was able to find. Although I may be wrong. That's happened before, and I'll accept it. But yeah, there's just nothing going on aside from a mention, and I believe it was the Was it the Serpent Kingdoms book? I think it was Serpent Kingdoms. Anyways, where it was, they were talking about the Fire Zone and the Underdark and all that sort of stuff, and I was like, yeah, like Azer, right on. I love Azer. And then there's no more information. And so, yeah, they're underdeveloped in the setting. They have there's a lot of great older information about what they're up to in the elemental plane of fire, but nothing on the prime material plane. And so in a lot of ways, it's wide open to bring material in for them. And, what's my take on how it would be done? Well, let's have some fun with this. So, things that I would do. I would make one direction I might go would be to make the Azer a major race in the Underdark of Chult and the Peninsula. The Underdark there is already unique with the whole Burning Lands thing that I talked about back with Fire Newts. I mean, there's multiple gates to the elemental plane of fire open. There are Fire Newts and Azer and Salamanders and all sorts of things all coming through and like living in the Underdark and setting up their own little outpost kingdoms and whatever. I would make them one of the major powers in the Underdark. And that will bring them neatly into the Forgotten Realms. And one of the things I would do to do that was it would actually help motivate the Fire Newts. And that was have the Fire Newts arrive first. They're doing their thing. They're performing their job as scouts and warriors for their Ifrit masters back in the elemental plane of fire. They set up all this whole operation. Things are going well. And then the Azer get word that something's going on. They found this new access to the prime material plane. It's full of resources. It's got all these great things. There's gems, adamant, all the stuff they want. So they mount up their own expedition and end up pushing the fire salamanders out and up onto the surface. So, the fire salamanders, you find them around the volcanoes and up in those higher galleries and stuff like that. But below that, Azer. I think that would be fun. Next thing I would do is I would really, really embrace that dwarf origin. I think it's cool. The idea that some dwarves escaped and made it to the prime material plane or to other places, while others stayed in the elemental plane of fire as slaves before freeing themselves and all that sort of stuff. I think that's a great origin story. I think the idea that normal dwarves, when exposed to the elemental plane of fire and the energies there for so long, became Azer is a cool idea. It works. I like it. It adds some much needed background to the dwarves in the Forgotten Realms, and it gives the Azer a really good reason to be there. Well, they didn't really need a good reason before. They're awesome, but this makes it more plausible for people who ask questions. The next thing that I would do is I would dump the greedy with no compassion thing. I mean, let them have their own culture that isn't just dwarf stereotypes turned up to 11. I mean, there's so many directions you could go in with them being from the elemental plane of fire, and generally cultures that are based off of ones that are have escaped mass slavery. I don't think they're generally going to produce a whole bunch of compassionless, ultra greedy individuals. That doesn't really track for me, and I think that they could have a better and more interesting culture, especially with all the conflicts that they have with the Ifrit and stuff like that. Next up, conflicts with the Fire Newts over territory. I already kind of got into that a little bit with my earlier idea about them taking over the actual Underdark areas. And, they're in competition for resources. They're in competition for living space. And I thought to myself, you know what? And okay, now, spoilers here. If you've actually played Tomb of Annihilation, cool. If you haven't, I don't know, cover your ears and just watch me for a second because I don't have subtitles set up yet. I'll give you a thumbs up when it's okay to look back at the screen. So, one of the areas in the Tomb of Annihilation is a set of mines. It's on the western part of Chult. It's up in the mountains there, and it's been captured by a dragon and a bunch of Fire Newts. I think there's some kobolds around there too, or some jazz. Anyways, and clearing them out is one of the optional things you can do in the adventure. And I thought to myself, what if instead of having, you know, fire newts and that stuff there, what if you put Azer there? Like, what if the Azer pushed up through that area, pushed the fire newts out, you know, defeated the dragon, defeated the kobolds, all that sort of stuff, and have now established themselves in that area. I mean, it's perfect for them. Like, it's mines, forges, the place is already set up for them. They just need to move in and start working. And I think that would be great. It would drum up some really interesting conflict and RP opportunities between them and the dwarves who used to live there. And just like it's chances and opportunities is what it is. It changes things up. It turns what, you know, the players think is going to be a combat encounter into a non-combat encounter, or even into like a negotiation or something else like that. And yeah, so that's what I'd go with that. So hang on, there we go. There's a thumbs up there for people who may be watching, but you know, didn't want to catch spoilers about the Tomb of Annihilation. Next thing I would go with, they're alien. Like, they've been out in like the elemental plane of fire functionally forever. And so coming into the world, I would give them no preconceptions or prejudices against prime material creatures. So things like fire newts and salamanders and other stuff from the elemental planes, yeah, they totally know about that. They have opinions. But like, they don't care about goblins. They've never seen goblins before. You know, terror folk, lizard folk, Yuan-Ti. Like, the Yuan-Ti aren't even a threat to them. Like, I don't even think they could convert them over. They'd probably explode or something like that. So they may actually be like the honest broker concept. Like, they'll work with anyone or provide stuff for anyone, not because, you know, they have deeper machinations or anything else like that, but because they literally don't see a reason why not to. They're like, well, yeah, the Terra folk wanted to buy these things. Why would I say no to them? You know, oh, well, yeah, the Yuan-Ti, they're my best customers. They're fantastic. Or yeah, no, we've got a great relationship going on with the lizard folk. You know, elves, yeah, they're great. You know, we get along fantastically with them. I think that'd be fun. And it would certainly like lead to some more like RP fun around like normal dwarves and stuff like that, who'd just be sort of gobsmacked that these fiery dwarves just don't have the same sort of prejudices and issues that they've developed culturally over the millennia they've been on Toril. And, you know, vice versa. You know, the Azer would be like, well, what's you guys' problem with elves? Like, did you guys fight a war with them? No? Did you guys do anything? Nothing? You're just being jerks to each other because jerks? Oh, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that would be fun. And the last thing that I would do would be to have fun with their biology. So here's the thing. Azer are, for all intents and purposes, metal dwarves. Like, the way they're described is their skin is functionally bronze. They generate a huge amount of heat. They're genasi on steroids. And this just has all sorts of fun opportunities. I mean, there's stuff like they may set the sheets on beds aflame. They would make hissing sounds in the rain. You know, like, you just have all sorts of fun with their biology and the ways that the prime material plane would interact with them. And the best part is that they don't have any weaknesses against other stuff. Like, I think they take some extra damage from cold or something like that. That's acceptable. Like, that's not a big issue. But it's still like they're not allergic to water like the fire newts are. And so, yeah, I think this would be just some neat things you could interject into your game, sort of like bring your character or bring your NPCs more to life in the minds of your fellow players, or of your players. You know, just, you know, past, you know, oh yeah, my beard and hair is on fire. You know, you can describe things, you know, like how water steams off of you. You know, how, yes, all your clothes do in fact have to be made out of bronze because fabric and leather just tend to dry out and crack on you all the time. So yeah, that's what I would do with them. So, next episode. All right. That's it for the Peoples of Chult series here on Lore Diver. Like I said in the opening, this was a rabbit hole that could go on forever, so I'm cutting it off now at the peoples that I could confirm were canonically in Chultland Peninsula. I mean, there's lots of possibilities. I could talk about Janazi, I could talk about were-tigers, and so on and so forth. But you know what? It is time to move on. It is time to get new things happening and to drag this video podcast into new territory. So, next weekend is Thanksgiving up here in Canada. So it's going to be quiet. There's no way that I would be able to do this show on Thanksgiving weekend in a manner that would allow me to maintain good relationships with my family in any way, shape, or form. So nothing's happening next week. However, on the weekend of the 20th, I will be live with a special episode about Baldur's Gate. That's right. There's a lot going on up there between its place in the new Descent to Avernus adventure and its own history. And so I'm going to take a deep look at the location. I'm going to talk about its history through the editions. I'm going to talk about what's going on there right now a little bit, so I don't spoil the adventure for anybody. And I'm also going to talk about how Baldur's Gate fits into the larger Forgotten Realms world, because I guarantee there are more things and more opportunities going on in Baldur's Gate than most people think that there are, and more chances to play more things and do more things. So I'm going to be digging into that hard. Now, after that, there'll be a break again, just because I need to rejig, get some other stuff sorted out. And then Series 2 is going to start on the 3rd of November. And I'm diving into the lore of the Arcane Age on Toro. That's right, the Arcane Age, Jamdath, Powerful Psyocracy, Nethril, Imiskar, all these sorts of places and more. I'm going to be talking about them, what was their deal, and how they might have interacted all with each other, because if you read the material as it is, everything's very atomistically made and nobody talks to each other, when in reality, that is one of the coolest parts of the Forgotten Realms and one of the coolest ages, and it definitely deserves more love than it's received. So I will see you then. That is the 20th and for the Baldur's Gate special, and then the 3rd for the beginning of the Arcane Age series. So Series 2 starts then. Now, thank you very much for listening. This has been Lore Diver, a POCGamer podcast. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. And if you would like to see more, head over to my blog, POCGamer.com, and check out POCGamer on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you want to support the podcast, there's links to my coffee on my blog, as well as my Patreon. Music was provided by purple-planet.com. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.